And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel. We are back here, joined by Matt Mlodzinski and Ben Anderson with another weekly recap of CBB. And our apologies about last week. We couldn't make it to get an episode, but we will be back. We will continue to provide you guys coverage of college basketball, our takeaways each week leading up to March Madness, and then the content will really ramp up there all around CBB Review. So, I guess relatively speaking, it wasn't the greatest week of college basketball in terms of the games, but the stakes are just so high at this time of the year that everything mattered so much. Let's dive right into our winners and losers. I'm going to start with you, Ben. Ben, what is your weekly winner for this past week?
It feels like a common occurrence on this podcast at this point, but my weekly winner is the Mountain West, and for a specific reason. We can talk about the games, and we'll get into that when we go to the around the conferences, but the selection reveal of the top 16 teams on Saturday really painted a strong picture for the possibility of a six-bid Mountain West, because they had San Diego State number 14 overall, which was a bit of a surprise to most people, especially the bracketologists that I follow on Twitter, at least. So to be able to see that the selection committee thinks so highly of the Mountain West already, I think shows a lot of promise for the conference as a whole to get maybe 5 or even 6 teams in. At this point, Torvik actually has Mountain West as a 6-bid league. That's the most likely scenario in his simulation. So I'm interested to see whether that will continue as we go on through deeper into February and March.
Yeah, Ben, you texted me right after the bracket reveal. They revealed the top 16 lines, or the top 16 teams, the top 4 lines. And Matt, I'm interested to hear your reactions on this. But San Diego State was probably the most surprising to me of that. But maybe they deserve it. I don't know. Let's go to you, Matt. What is your weekly winner?
None other than Detroit Mercy. I mean, you really cannot understate this. The fact that this is a team that was 0-26 heading into this game against IUPUI, and they were able to eke out the win. Detroit, I feel like, has been like a darling over the past couple of years in college basketball because they had Antoine Davis. He almost broke the all-time scoring record. A lot of people were starting to tune into these Detroit games. And, this isn't the first time that they've had a pretty bad season. This is a program that really has had some rough years, but it was starting to be historic in the wrong way. And I just think you have to give it, a round of applause to Detroit Mercy for finally being able to win a game. Who knows? Maybe they can double that. Maybe they can win 2. Maybe they can win more than DePaul when it's all said and done. You never know. I think they're on the right track.
Did you see the singular fan that stormed? Yeah. And the security just didn't even bother to do anything about it? That's just college basketball, low major college basketball in a nutshell. I love it. For my weekly winner, I'm going to go down south to a team in the American Conference that, honestly, all 3 of us have just not given enough coverage to on this podcast, in my opinion. South Florida. South Florida came away with a win this past weekend. They are now 19-5, 12-1 in American Athletic, winners of their last 11. This is not an easy place to win games, South Florida, that is. They haven't had a winning season since 2018 to 19. They have not made the dance since 2011 to 2012. That was back when South Florida was in the Big East. So just really impressive things going on there. I think So in the non-con, they lost consecutive games to Maine, Hofstra, and UMass, which obviously is not helping their at-large case. But right now they're clicking on all cylinders. Over their last 17 games, like I said, 16-1. They have shot over 40% as a team from 3, and they have one of the highest three-point rates in the country, a number of guys that could hurt you. And they just kind of snuck up on us. We didn't really regard South Florida. I don't think anybody's regarded South Florida too highly, but good for them. So finally giving South Florida and the Bulls their much needed attention. Throwing it over to the losers, back to Ben. Weekly loser, take us away.
Yeah, I'm going to stay in the American Athletic Conference here. There's been a lot of great stories in that league this year, specifically, USF, like you just mentioned. Also, SMU is having quietly a really good year, as well as Charlotte. But my loser is going to be the two teams that we thought were going to run this league, and those are FAU and Memphis. They both lost today, FAU to USF, as Dan mentioned, and then Memphis got 100-pieced SMU this Sunday, which you never want to see. I did not personally watch that game fully, but all evidence points to the team sort of looking like they quit. The body language was bad. Penny Hardaway's really struggled with his rotations. In particular, 10 players played more than 10 minutes this game, which is not an ideal sign, especially in late February. What happened here? I was real high on Memphis in December. I thought with the addition of Naquan Tomlin, they were going to have this huge run. Caleb Mills did get hurt, but I think there's deeper problems inside there. I think you have to be really disappointed if you're a Tiger fan. And then FAU, they returned everyone. We thought they were going to be this fantastic team that was going to run the American, or at least close to it, with the Tigers, and it just hasn't clicked in the same way. They have losses to bad teams in Bryan and Florida Gulf Coast, and they're not destroying the American like many predicted they might. Just a disappointing. They're not a bad team. It's just a little bit less than what we thought.
Yeah, I still have faith in FAU. Maybe in March they're like a really high variance team, so maybe they could just somehow turn it on at the right time. Memphis, I just don't know what to say about them. Naquan Tomlin has just gone the opposite direction of what the addition was supposed to do to the team. Almost like everyone says addition by subtraction. That one's almost subtraction by addition, so to speak. But yeah, very, very disappointing for Memphis. Matt, what's your weekly loser?
Yeah, I got to say, our good Twitter friend, Tony Patelis, is asking us to talk about the CBI, and we are with Memphis, and we're going to add another team to that right now, and that's St. John's, because the Red Storm just blew a 19-point lead to my Seton Hall Pirates. That's the wrong side right here. There we go. I'm going to try not to be biased with this, and I'm going to keep it to the post-game comments that Rick Pitino made, just completely ripping his team. And you got to give him credit for that. So maybe they should have been the weekly winner, because what other coach in college basketball is going to say what Pitino said? And he's totally right about it. This is not a tough team at all. The opposite can be said about Seton Hall, a very tough physical team that really doesn't shoot the ball well, but keeps themselves in games because of how physical their guards are and the defense that Shaheen Holloway breaches. And on the opposite side, you've got a St. John's team that apparently Rick Pitino never wanted to put together, even though he literally did that in the transfer portal. So who's to blame here? Like, is it the facilities at St. John's? Is it Pitino because he's maybe losing his mind? I don't know. But either way, Pitino is the weekly loser, because it kind of seems like a loser by what he's saying right now. And I know that he's not. I do want to clarify. I've talked to Rick before. He is one of the most fun guys to talk to. So this is kind of like all jokes aside. Rick is a great guy. He's a great coach. But it's not looking too hot right now. And for a St. John's team that somehow still looked good in the metrics before this loss, I don't think they should be anywhere near the bubble, because you're 6-9 in conference play. To me, it doesn't matter if your metrics are top 50, top 55, whatever they may be tomorrow morning. That's not good. That ain't going to cut it. Rick Pitino and St. John's, my weekly loser.
Weekly winner, though, is his press conferences, because he always has an entertaining gem from every single one. The quotes that he just has out of context, or not even, it's not even like out of context. They're just wild quotes to begin with. But for my weekly loser to round out this segment, I'm going to go with Purdue backcourt truthers, because that was kind of myself. The Boilermakers, their guards got a lot of blame, obviously, going back to last season and their upset loss to Fairleigh Dickinson in the tournament, and very rightfully so. And then a big storyline this year is, the Purdue guards, they've improved so much. And what do they do this weekend? We'll talk about this in a sec, but they drop an absolute dud to an Ohio State team that has an interim head coach right now. Now, look, Zach Edey did not have a great game. I know he had his 22-12 or whatever, but if you watch the game, he did not play particularly well. At the same time, it was also just the old patterns with the Purdue guards. Fletcher Lawyer, we talked about this, Ben, awful. And I think we're both out on him at this point. Lance Jones had a rough game. I still like Lance Jones. And then Braden Smith was solid, but just overall an underwhelming performance from this group as a whole. That's what everybody's looking at. What will the Purdue guards do in March? Everybody loves to say guards win in March, and not very good for people pick the confidence of Purdue pickers in the tournament based on what just happened on Sunday, just a couple hours ago, actually. So Speaking of which, we're going to dive right into the scores that were notable of this past week. Let's pull it up on the screen. There we go. So we could start. We got that on the bottom with Purdue, Ohio State. I just mentioned that. I also want to talk about UConn and Marquette. I know this one happened on Saturday, but I feel like this is the headliner. UConn 81, Marquette 53. Absolute just dominance. And even if Purdue did happen to hold on against Ohio State, I think this really, really reasserts UConn as the clear number one team in the country. And just for the second year in a row, we're sitting here late February, and it's UConn that's playing their best ball. That is awfully scary, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, it's very scary. I'm not going to say that I enjoy it, being a Seton Hall and Syracuse alum, but there's no doubt that UConn is far and away the best team in college basketball after what we saw yesterday from them and today from Purdue. With that being said, I do want to take it to a couple other games in the ACC. Syracuse, North Carolina, I was at that game, covered it for CBB Review. That was just fun. That just kind of brought me back to the good old days as a Syracuse basketball fan. And I think it kind of showed the potential of this Orange team that they've had it rough. Starting center, their big 7-footer, out for the rest of the season with an injury. Then Benny Williams gets kicked off the team. Just a lot going on. So the fact that they were able to put together that win, I don't think they're going to be playing in March Madness unless they win the ACC tournament. But that's one of those wins that the fans will remember and maybe this team can build on. It's a lot of sophomores on this team. But Pittsburgh, we got to keep an eye on the Panthers. 5 straight wins. Blake Himson with a 41-point outing. There was one point where he had like 30-some and was outscoring the other team in their past game against Louisville. But before that, Pittsburgh able to beat Virginia. And I just think at this point, you got to look at the Panthers as a tournament team, ending Virginia's run and keeping the streak of their own. Keep an eye on the Panthers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to touch on Virginia and Pitt in just a second, but I did want to bring up one thing about Marquette. I do think that their winning streak, they had a long one before this UConn loss. It was a little bit fraudulent because they played Villanova twice, St. John's twice, DePaul, Seton Hall, and Georgetown, and then Butler. None of the top teams in the Big East during that winning streak. So I think people saw that they had this gaudy record. They got up to number 4 in the AP poll. I thought they was going to end up Butler. They pulled that one out. Obviously, they did not do so against UConn. So I didn't want to say that. I really don't think Marquette's the 4th best team in the country. They might have the 4th best resume, but I would pick a couple teams above them that are ranked below them at this point. But on Virginia, their offense is starting to be a little bit concerning for a variety of reasons. Mainly, they don't take enough 3-point shots. They only attempted 14 in the loss against Pitt, and that was slightly concerning considering, Dan brought up a great stat. I don't know if this is quite accurate anymore, but Virginia has no 3-point shooters in between 31 and 47%. We either have guys that are bricks or absolute sharpshooters. I believe it's still pretty much accurate, but if you have 3 guys that can shoot over 47%, please take more than 14 threes. And then the other reason is that I'm a little concerned about the ball handling for Virginia. We don't really have a second option with Beekman. I'll get to the Wake Forest game in the Around the Conferences segment, but that was a little bit concerning here as well. One last note. You want to go over to Texas Tech, Kansas? I'll let someone else talk about this afterwards. But Kansas, I don't know, man. They've struggled with injuries, but it really just doesn't seem like they can win outside of the fog, which will give you a good record in the Big 12, but not necessarily in a neutral site tournament in the ACC. Really, this sort of looks like a second-round exit kind of a team for me, especially because of the lack of depth, which might make them struggle in a 2-day turnaround. They did beat Oklahoma on the road on Saturday, but Oklahoma was without Rivaldo Suarez and John Hughley, 2 pretty big pieces for them. So hard to say if they really brought their A game during that time for the Jayhawks.
Yeah, did you have Nick Timberlake leading the team in scoring for any individual game on your bingo card like 2 months ago? or like at any point during the year. Like
something has gone terribly wrong if Nick
Yeah.
Timberlake is leading the team in scoring at that point.
Yeah, that just an embarrassing performance, and they did end up, like you said, getting McCullough back and beating Oklahoma, but that's pathetic. I'm sorry. Darion Williams, though, shout out to him. 30 points on a perfect night, 12 for 12 shooting, perfect from the line, 11 boards. I guess technically he did have one turnover, so slightly less than perfect night, but that is just an incredible box score right there. But yeah, Kansas, lack of depth. UNC also low-key has a real depth problem. Their bench has really not done them anything recently. And then I guess we could head over to the SEC games that we were going to talk about in this segment. So I'll start with Auburn 101, South Carolina 61. South Carolina also lost to LSU at home over the weekend. So just unfortunate for the Gamecocks, because this was when the world finally brought into Lamont Paris and that squad, and then they do this. Vegas, though, shout out to Vegas. They were all over it. They had Auburn as double-digit favorites. I don't think anybody was really questioning that, because the money did come in at South Carolina, but I think people generally understood. So maybe we all kind of knew as a society that South Carolina was just, their resume was better than their overall ability. And then, Auburn puts up 101 against South Carolina and then puts up only 59 against Kentucky. Like, what is this? I did not know what to make of that. That's just, the only explanation is college basketball. As far as Kentucky is concerned, I know like they're a notoriously struggling defensive team. They did win this game. I still don't understand why Rob Dillingham is out there rotting on the bench, playing like 15 to 20 minutes a game. I feel like that will come back to bite them at some point, but a much needed bounce back win. I was getting ready to slander Kentucky if we were going to record last week, and they end up having a 2-0 week. So a little bit less slander for Kentucky now. And then Matt or Ben, if you guys want to touch on Indiana State or anything else, that's the last game, though, that we haven't really touched on.
Yeah, I mean, I was ridiculed in my top 25 last week because I had Indiana State pretty close to the top 15. They might have been in my top 15. And I do a lot of it based on power rankings and the fact that they hadn't been losing, and I've watched them, and, hey, they look good. The Missouri Valley is a pretty good mid-major conference, and now they're 0-2 and this past week. And I think we got to look at the Sycamores as, if they get upset and don't win their conference tournament, are they the Memphis of the Missouri Valley? Do they not even make the NCAA tournament? Because the Southern Illinois loss isn't that bad. If anyone watches college basketball, you know that that's the true Xavier Johnson of college basketball. He doesn't play for Indiana. He plays for Southern Illinois. But the Illinois State loss, that was a little bit more concerning, and that's the one that makes me rethink, like, okay, are the Sycamores really that dangerous of a team?
Yeah, we'll discuss that. We have a segment on non-power. We call it the Power 7 now on this show. Non-Power 7 teams making an at-large bid. So I do have them somewhere in my consideration. Indiana State. We'll discuss that further in depth. But Ben, unless you have anything else to add, no. All right, let's go around the conferences then. I'll throw it right to you. So Power 7, we'll do it at two conferences each. We'll combine the Pac-12 and Mountain West into one little segment. Start with the ACC, Ben. What are your takeaways from this past week?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to the most confusing conference in college basketball yet again. Everyone, I think, I've been on this train for a while, but everyone needs to just have a measured take about the ACC. It's a pretty good league, but they're not doing themselves any favors when they're trying to get that fourth team into a bid, because everyone else keeps losing. I'll start off with Wake Forest. Wake went 0-2 with road losses to Duke and UVA. Now, on paper, that's not terrible, but they really should have won one of them, especially at UVA, where the Cavaliers managed to shoot just 1 for 11 from the free throw line and still win 49-47. I watched every minute of that game, and I wish I didn't, but here we are. UVA escapes with a win to stay within striking distance of the top of the league. The top three of Duke, Carolina, and Virginia seem to have a pretty good shot of making that double bye round that's so important in the conference tournaments. Meanwhile, Miami is cooked. They're just done. They lost to Boston College. They had an 0-2 week. They lost to Clemson, not disastrous by any means, but then losing to BC. It's just a lost season for the Canes. No really other way to describe it. Meanwhile, staying in the Sunshine State, Florida State tricked us, I think. they tricked all of us. They are back to what we thought they were. They're 7-7 in the league. They don't even have the strong conference record to show for anything anymore. I think they're just an average team, sort of typical of Leonard Hamilton's tenure as of late. Other news, Matt mentioned Blake Hinson going off for 41. My goodness, what a performance. And I texted both of y'all this morning, or Saturday morning. I was like, wow, Jared McCain, what an impressive performance, 35 points. And then Blake Hinson had to go and one-up him on the same level right there. So a little bit unfortunate for McCain in that situation, but two fantastic performances overall. Georgia Tech continues to be the most confusing conference. They lose to Notre Dame, but then come back and beat Syracuse, who had just beat North Carolina. Now the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets own victories over Syracuse, North Carolina, and Duke, but also losses to everyone under the sun. So who knows what to make of Damon Stoudemire in his first year. And then finally, one more thing, North Carolina State beats Clemson, ensuring that both teams sort of stay in the 6-8 range as they have been in there for the past decade. I'm sure both fan bases are extremely happy with how this season has gone for both coaches as well. I'm sure everyone loves being an NC State fan and a Clemson fan at this point. So that's the ACC right now.
All right. And then, Matt, I'll throw it over to you for the Big East.
Yeah, I mean, the Big East, I know we already touched on it, but what more can you say about Connecticut? I mean, far and away the best team in the country, far and away the best team in the conference. Marquette, though, there's been some games where Marquette just hasn't showed up. And I don't really like that because I think you guys kind of mentioned it. Like, are they really the number 4 team in the country? I don't know if they are. I was starting to buy back into them. And I know that Tyler Kolek can get going, but it just seems like sometimes he has these games where he goes like 0 for 9, 2 for 12, whatever. I mean, he just doesn't have a great game. And Marquette doesn't have enough to pick it back up. Cam Jones has not progressed the way that we thought he would after last season. Oso Ighodaro kind of just has the same little floater that he pushes into the hoop. Like, he doesn't have a ton of moves down low. And, yeah, I don't know what to think of the Golden Eagles. I do know that Creighton is a team to watch. At this point, I think Creighton is the second best team in the Big East. I know that it could flip-flop, but they just seem like they're playing some good basketball. Baylor Shireman had one heck of a game in that win over Butler, and the Blue Jays are just playing great. I'll move on to Seton Hall. I know I touched on the Pirates a little bit, a team that I tweeted this out. I don't understand how Seton Hall's on the bubble when they have 5 quad 1 wins, a winning record on the road. Worst loss to Southern California, not great. Most teams have a loss like that. That Rutgers loss doesn't even look that bad anymore, and they have 10 wins in the conference. So I'll say that, Seton Hall's got a big game against Butler coming up next weekend, but if they play the way they did against St. John's, they should be in the tournament. Moving down to that other list, though, like the Providences of the world, the Villanovas, the Xavier. I had a friend talk to me couple weeks ago. He said he thinks the Big East is going to get 8 or 9 teams in. And I was like, hold on a sec. Like, that ain't going to happen. It's going to be like 5 or 6. And it's looking like it's going to be 5 or 6 because they're just beating up on each other. And these Big East teams didn't do enough in the non-conference to be able to have the, kind of what the Big 12 has been able to have, where they can beat up on each other and they don't have to worry about it. And I think the Big East has a little bit of an issue right now because what is a good conference isn't going to get represented the way that I think they are.
Mm-hmm. And then we move on to the SEC, which honestly, I think they just aren't getting enough credit for just the league that they are. And like the amount of just genuinely good teams that this conference has, I think it's kind of just being a little bit swept under the rug. I think overall we're looking at a 7, maybe 8-bid league. Potentially. I think Torvik has it at the expected bid number between 7 and 8. So I'll get into some of the teams. By the way, do you know who leads the way now in the SEC? It's the Alabama Crimson Tide. They are now 18-7 overall, but 10-2 in conference after a blowout win over A&M this week. So they're looking, I mean, the same Alabama that they've been all year, right? Just they'll score a bunch of points. They play Kentucky this week. We'll talk about that. That'll be like an insane over-under total line there. Speaking of A&M, they have completely fallen off the rails. A disappointment from a team that I once thought they were like really solid. They really climbed their way up the AP poll top 25. And then not only did they lose that game that I talked about to Bama this week, but they also lost to Vanderbilt. So there's just no defending them anymore. A&M is kind of cooked in the same way that Ben talked about Miami being cooked. South Carolina, we discussed them. I guess we could call that regression to the mean. They just are a worse team than their resume indicated, and eventually that caught up to them. And then, like I said, Kentucky, an important bounce back week. It's crazy what happens when you actually play a lick of defense. So good for the Wildcats, and a team that I think we've kind of forgotten about but has crept back on the radar. How about them Gators? They have really made a comeback. They're winners of 7 of their last 8, including a win over LSU and at Georgia this week. So those are the teams. Who did I not mention yet? I think of the tournament teams, Mississippi State, you think? Yeah, kind of. Ole Miss, kind of the same. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I think those are the notable teams to discuss this week. So that's my roundup of the SEC. We'll throw it back to Ben, and yeah, we'll go Big Ten. So before you go over the games, I think we have not discussed the Holtman firing yet on this show. So if you want to like talk about that for like 30 seconds and then go into some of the games.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris Holtman, the coach of Ohio State, was dismissed after his team lost to Wisconsin on, I believe it was Wednesday. So really, I thought it was going to be a good hire. I thought Holtman had everything he needed to succeed. But Ohio State is quietly a really good job, and they expect a lot from all of their sports. It's a football school, but if you have the biggest budget or second biggest or whatever in the country in terms of athletic department, you have the ability to make fires that have buyouts of $12 million. It'll be very interesting to see who they hire next. I imagine they want to take a big swing if they're going to fire a coach of Chris Holtman's status, but after 7 years and not a ton of tournament success, it was just time. I know we mentioned Purdue. The Purdue upset initially, it was really great to see Jake Diebler so passionate about that victory. His first game as an interim head coach. I'm going to have a measured take about Purdue. Realistically, they were probably the number one team in terms of resume, even up to this loss against Ohio State. Even though UConn looks like the best team, I think it was reasonable to have Purdue number 1 in your rankings. Now I don't think that's so valid anymore with those 3 losses, especially when you compare it to UConn's 2, one of which includes Kansas at the Phog, where they never lose. I think UConn is probably the best team in the country, but Purdue, as you mentioned, Dan, has a little bit of backboard issues. I think it's just the same team as last year, not in a bad way, but in the way that they show you how to beat them. And if they play to their A game, they're very difficult, almost impossible to beat, especially if they're shooting threes, right? The question is whether they are able to play their A game for all 6 games and make it to that national championship game. We don't know that yet. Only March will tell, but they remain the second best team in the country for what I'm concerned. Beyond that, though, it was a pretty quiet week in the Big Ten. Illinois just destroyed Michigan. Holy cow. Like, that was not even close. Everyone, if you read Michigan media, it was not fun. Like, this game was over by the 10-minute mark of the first half. Michigan came back and made it a bit of a game against their in-state rival, Michigan State, but I have no idea what this athletic department's going to do. Yeah, like with Juwan Howard and everything like that. That's going to be a very interesting offseason for them, especially with how they handled Doug McDaniel's suspension, not suspension, road game only suspension. What's going on there? I don't really know. I'm not qualified to speak on it, but it just seems like a bit of a mess overall. Illinois then survived against Maryland. Maryland just, I don't know what to do with that team. It's sort of just like in the NC State and Clemson mold of, is anyone happy? Like, is anyone having a good time at Maryland basketball? It's hard to say at this point, right? It feels like they should be a lot better than they are, and they're not. It's Kevin Willard's only second season, I believe. Matt, you can correct me on that, but coming over from Seton Hall, hopefully we'll get it going. He has some pretty good talent there. Other things, Wisconsin is not doing themselves any favors right after they still are picked in the top 16 for Selection Sunday. They immediately go off and lose to Iowa. Shout out Owen Freeman, probably looking like the best freshman in the league, arguably. So he had 20 points and 12 rebounds, I think. So he's looking real good for the Hawkeyes. And then finally, Indiana, weekly mention, they're still bad. They still can't shoot. They lose to Northwestern when Boo Buie didn't even have a good game. Ryan Langford went off though. So someone's coming out. Ty Berry, meanwhile, for the Wildcats, is out for the season with a torn meniscus. So just want to throw that out there. For a bubble team, that's pretty important. Nebraska continues to win all the time at home, and everything seems pretty normal-ish in the Big Ten other than that.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate Wisconsin because we talk about teams peaking at the right time, right? This is the time you want to be playing your best basketball. Wisconsin's peaked at the wrong time. They're playing their worst basketball right now. So that screams first round loss to me. You never know, obviously, but not good for the Badgers. Good thing I visited them a few weeks ago while they were at their peak. All right, back to you, Matt. We're going to go with the Big 12 for your takeaways for the week.
Well, my first comment is, if you're in Texas and you're in the Big 12, you're sitting pretty right now. I mean, 4 of the top 6 teams in the Big 12 are teams from Texas. You look at what Houston has done this season. You look at what Baylor has done this season. Both of those teams in that top 4 seed line on the Saturday selection reveal. And then you look at what TCU and Texas Tech have been able to do. Now, Texas Tech's been a little bit off and on, but I do want to shout out TCU because Jamie Dixon has this Horned Frog team playing a lot better than I thought they would after losing Mike Miles. TCU just looks like a very good basketball team. They're probably the next closest to a lock. I think the top 4 teams in the Big 12 in Iowa State, Houston, Kansas, and Baylor, they're all locks. I think TCU is next on line. I mean, they've got a real good resume. They're winning games at the right time, and they have a good road record as well. They're like 5-3 on the road. A couple teams I do want to look at, though, because the Big 12, remember, it was teams beating up on each other, and they should be fine, and that is true, but a couple teams are starting to fall off. UCF, I think they were already kind of on a thin line, and now they're even further down. They're 4-8 in the conference. Kansas State as well. They're now 15-10 overall. They're a couple games below 500 in the Big 12. I think we need to look at the Wildcats, and Jerome Tang maybe I think it's an off year. He is definitely the right coach to have at Kansas State, but he just had some great players last year. It's tough to replace them. He tried in the transfer portal. It's just not really working. It surprises me. I wonder if Arthur Kaluma regrets leaving Creighton to come to Kansas State because he might not play in March Madness this year when it's all said and done. And then I want to look at Oklahoma and BYU, 2 teams that have kind of been ranked for a lot of this season, but they keep kind of going like win-loss, win-loss. Yes. I mean, I just don't know what to think of both of these teams. One day I'm like, oh yeah, these teams look good. They're winning games they're supposed to. Another day I'm like, they're not really winning games to impress me. Mm-hmm. And that's where I kind of struggle with the Cougars and the Sooners, is that they have pretty good resumes, but if I'm picking a bracket, at least right now, I'm still kind of waiting to see, like, hey, are you going to show me why I should pick you, or are you just kind of going to look like a team that might win a game, might not, and we're just kind of going to forget about you at the end of the year?
I think with the Big 12, the key when evaluating that conference is look at the big picture and not micro analyze every individual game because you're just going to go crazy. So, yeah. I mean, Ben said this is saying not much, but it's the worst the Big Ten has been in a couple years, which I might agree with. I kind of have to look into that more, but
I just don't think they have any elite teams. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't point to someone and be like, I am confident that they will make the Final Four.
Yeah, Kansas.
Houston, like, I don't really feel like that.
Kansas is disappointing in that respect. Kansas was supposed to hold up that end of the bargain, but we're going to keep moving on. Pac-12 takeaways. Again, there's not usually much to say here besides, Arizona and then a couple other teams. But Arizona has, to be fair, returned to their dominance. They've won each of their last 4 games by double digits this past weekend. 105-60 over Arizona State. Took care of business there. However, Arizona's still only a half game up in this conference because Wazoo, Washington State, is lurking. Another perfect week for the Cougars, and they are starting to cement their first tournament bid in over a decade, well over a decade. Actually, I looked at this stat, and I think this was Gary Parrish was talking about this. Since the 1980s, the only coaches that brought them to the tournament are Tony Bennett and Kelvin Sampson, 2 pretty much Hall of Fame coaches. So for Kyle Smith to now bring them to their third or be the third coach to take them to the tournament in that much amount of time, that's a great look for him. And then I guess besides those two teams, credit where credit is due, I should say. UCLA, they're figuring out how to win games. It is way, way too late for them to really do anything meaningful, but they are, I guess, playing spoiler. They're winners of 6 straight. Did anybody catch what just happened in that Utah game? Did they win that?
I didn't know.
I can double check. You keep talking, I'll double check.
Yeah. I know they were playing Utah, was knotted up like early in the second half. But they're finally playing Mick Cronin-like defense. So whether they won or lost that game, not sure. That's more critical for Utah and their bubble resume. But
Utah won.
Who won?
Utah won by 1 point.
Oh, okay. So that's pretty huge, but
doesn't change my opinion on Utah though. It does not.
No.
I'm sorry. You can't be 500 in the Pac-12 and expect an at-large bid. I don't know what we're talking about here. I don't care they won at BYU.
Has them on the bubble. I don't know, man.
I don't care they won at BYU. BYU just lost to Oklahoma State, the worst team.
No, I see what you're saying. They deserve a mention because of where Bracket Matrix has them. That's the only thing.
I agree with you. Like, you should be mentioning them. I don't get it with this team.
And then
I don't either.
For Mountain West land, it's basically like the conference. Benny talks about it in the winners and losers. They're doing the absolute optimal results in optimizing their chances at getting the most bids possible. Nobody necessarily on like the top 3 lines, but a lot of teams, just because 7 of the 11 teams are at either 4 or 5 losses. So it is wide open, and just all those teams did really well in the non-conference to cement those resumes. Specific teams I want to talk about: 2-0 week for San Diego State. They won against Colorado State, and then they won against New Mexico, both by double digits at home. They've got some real dangerous scorers. I mean, they got Jaden Ledee, but they got other guys that could go off, and they could really defend. So it's a team, once again, I like San Diego State, really similar to the way I liked them last year. I guess more Ledee dependent and less like spreading the wealth, but in general, I think they play a similar style. New Mexico has kind of fallen off low-key. Right, they lost at home to UNLV. I think this was last week, but we didn't discuss this on the pod. They did squeak one out against Nevada on the road, so that was huge. But New Mexico losing at home, like they never lose at home, and then they lost one to UNLV. I just wanted to mention that. I know people like have all this hope for the 7-bid Mountain West. I still look at it as more of a 5, even 4-bid league, and that's phenomenal for the Mountain West, but that's just the way I view it. I think I don't like want to, be emphasizing this so much because I love the Mountain West and their play so much, but I feel like a lot of the diehards are overrating them a slight amount, right? No?
I'm a fan. I mean, their metrics are really good. And when I watch the games, I feel like every single Mountain West team has like a must-watch player. I mean, like Utah State has great Osabor. Colorado State has Isaiah Stevens. Nevada has Blackshear. I mean, obviously San Diego State is obvious. Boise State has Max Rice. I mean, last year he was awesome to watch, and Tyson Degenhart is really good. And the Broncos have like 5 quad 1 wins. And then New Mexico, obviously, I've been on their train for a while. So I mean, I'm a fan of the Mountain West, but I also get the point. Like, I was talking about this. I know this is kind of sidetracking. I don't mean to cut you off either, but it seems like if you're a conference with between like 10 and 12 teams, that's almost better than being a conference with so many teams, because you have less bad teams that you can lose to, so you can kind of stack up more meaningful wins. And that's what you see like in the Big East. Like, there's more opportunities for like quad 1 wins because everyone's beating up on Georgetown, DePaul, then you beat up on each other, and then maybe you beat other teams because you're playing each other twice a year. So like it's easier to knock off teams when you see them so often. Whereas if you're in a big league where there's like 15, 16 teams, you're only playing certain teams at home like once every 3 years. You might only be playing a team in general once a year. And then there's like more bad teams to lose to hurt your resume. So I don't know. To me, it's long-winded, but that's where I see the Mountain West. Like, I think they're good teams, but they also benefit from not being that big of a conference.
I will say one thing on the Mountain West. I'm not the foremost expert on the league or anything, but it does seem like 3 of their good teams are very high variance in New Mexico, Boise State, and Colorado State, to where their success or their place in the tournament may not accurately reflect their like how good they are, because they could just lay an egg. All 3 of them could like get blown out in the first round. I could see that pretty easily, especially Boise State. Like they just, I'm not very confident.
I'm on the Boise State train,
but they can shoot themselves out of the building. I think
we'll see like a 6 seed go to the Elite Eight, and we'll see everyone else lose in the first weekend. That's I think what most likely is going to happen. But as far as I alluded to this earlier, so we'll get into this real quick before we do our game picks rapid fire. The bubble watch, but for today we're going to go non-Power 7. So we're calling this the Power 7 now. But outside of the Power 6 and the Mountain West, which teams have a chance to get an at-large bid? And for me, I wrote down 9 teams in kind of 3 tiers of 3 each. So the definites right now, I'd say Dayton, FAU, and St. Mary's. The ones with a legitimate chance, but they need to prove more: Indiana State, Gonzaga, and I put Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are not in at all right now, but they could have an exceptional end to the regular season, maybe an upset loss in the conference tournament and sneak in. I put 3 more teams: SMU, Drake, and James Madison. So I'll let either of you guys take the conversation away, but I just wanted to set the stage with that.
Yeah, what's your opinion on McNeese State?
Maybe you could put McNeese State in that last tier. Didn't they have a pretty bad loss recently, though?
Yeah, but so did Indiana State, and that's where I'm like, because Indiana State, I don't believe, has beaten much of anyone. Grand Canyon is the answer in terms of like the key one, in my opinion, because they have that win over San Diego State, and no one has that. No one has that win, not even St. Mary's, and not even really Dayton.
So I look at McNeese, and I mean, the big thing for me is I've got my spreadsheet up. I mean, they're just outside the top 50 in the net. They're 1-0 in quad 1, and they're 2-2 in quad 2. That's pretty good for that level of play, to be 3-2 in quad 1 and 2 games. And their worst ranking in the metrics I look at is 61st in KenPom. They're top 50 in BPI and SOR. So I feel like McNeese is checking off all the boxes. I'll throw Samford at you too. I know they just had a bad loss, but when it comes down to it, they're still 23-4. Like if they win out in the regular season, make it to their conference championship, and lose by 2 points, I think that would probably mean that they'd be like 29-5, 30-5. Like I know that we've kept teams like that out before, but the SoCon is also one of those mid-major conferences that gets a little bit more love than other teams. But I feel like UNC Greensboro was a team that was left out one year with like 5 or 6 losses. So I'm hesitant on Samford. I'm hesitant on like an Akron. Like I feel like 6 losses already, and if they get a 7th playing in the MAC, probably not going to make it. I'll throw one more at you though. What about VCU? Because I saw them live, and like they look like a tournament team to me, and they play in the A10. And I'm throwing out a huge like if here, but if they win out in the regular season, then at 17-8 right now, they would finish 23-8. That would include a win over Richmond and Dayton on the road.
Yeah, but
conference tournament?
McNeese beat VCU.
Yeah. Plus,
is that a bad loss though?
That's I don't like why at that point why you put VCU over McNeese.
And VCU already beat Dayton too. They already did beat them once, so that could be 2 wins over Dayton.
In the way that I think McNeese and like Samford is superior to the rest of their conference, I don't think VCU is superior to the rest of the A10 in that way. So I think they will like lose. I think it's likely they lose like 2 or 3 more games anyway. That's why I'm like not really having the conversation.
Actually, VCU, like it's funny, they actually played McNeese and Samford in the like their first 2 games. It's kind of funny. Like they played these teams that just happened to have like 3-4 losses. But I mean, they've just been playing so great lately. I don't know. Like they caught my eye when I watched them, and
I will say I don't feel really great about any of these teams though. Like usually there's a couple of mid-majors where like, yeah, those can win a couple games, right? But even like St. Mary's, like is St. Mary's actually that good, or are they just ranked 15 in KenPom? You know what I mean?
Indiana State's an easy, like everyone's picking them to the Sweet 16. If they get in, everyone like they're just a fun team, you know.
They are. I love Indiana State. They went 0-2.
Everyone's picking them in their bracket to the Sweet 16. If
they went 0-2, you know what I mean?
They did. Yeah, first time ranked since Larry Bird, and that's what happens. Very unfortunate. But we're over 45 minutes now, so let's just get to our rapid fire game picks. I know we've had a lot of fun talking about this, but we do got to wrap up at some point, unfortunately. So let's get to it. First game, we got Iowa State at Houston. I will throw it to bat first.
Yeah, this is a high-level game between both teams. Iowa State has had some really good wins. To me, this game's about Kelvin Sampson and him kind of understanding how important this game is, with Purdue going down, with how open the Big 12 is to win, and with Houston trying to hold on to a 1 seed. I feel like the 7.5 spread is maybe a little bit too much. This seems like it'll be closer than that. But I like Houston to win this game.
Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I like Houston as well, although I really like Iowa State. I think they're like Final Four level good this year. But being on the road in the Big 12 is just so tough. You don't have that Hilton magic. Give me the Cougars in Houston.
I'll take Houston as well. By the way, you do not play March Madness at home, and Iowa State is the lowest away from home rating according to Haslametrics in the country. So that is a notable statistic, although they are a very talented, very capable team. I'm still taking Houston in this game. Moving on, we got UConn at Creighton. I mean, I'm personally not picking against the hottest and best team in the country right now in UConn, so I'll lock that in before I throw it back to Ben. I'm UConn for me.
Yeah, no, the Huskies. I'm not picking the Huskies until I get proven wrong. Give me UConn, even though it's on the road. I still don't really completely believe in Creighton, to be honest. I think they're a little like they play 6 guys and 5 of them are good. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about Creighton right now.
So I think there's 3 ways that UConn loses a game. That's if a team shoots the lights out against Connecticut and makes like 15 threes, Creighton can do that. That's if Donovan Clingan picks up a couple early fouls and he's forced to go to the bench and the other team has a dominant big man who can take over. Creighton has that in Ryan Kalkbrenner. And honestly, if it's on the road in a tough environment. And to me, that's Creighton. Not to mention that since UConn rejoined the Big East, the team that has beaten them the most often, the team that has struggled, that UConn struggled against the most, is Creighton. It took them, I think, until their 4th year rejoined in the Big East. They lost like their first 6 games against this Greg McDermott coach team. So give me Creighton on the road.
Okay. All right. I like that. We're not going to go same way across the board for our first 2. Let's move on to the Mountain West. Always picking a game here. San Diego State at Utah State. Matt, I'll let you go first.
This seems like it's a defining game for both teams. Like San Diego State, I wonder if they hear the noise, like you don't deserve to be a top 4 seed, and maybe they're going to come in here and pick up another good road win at Utah State. Utah State's kind of dropped off a little bit. Like they're still winning some games here and there, but like a couple weeks ago, they were a top 15 team. And funny enough, it was the away game they lost to San Diego State, which kind of knocked them down a bit. So you know what? I'm gonna take Utah State in this game. I think they put this one together. I think they have a little bit more to play for, and it's a tough environment to play in.
Ben?
Yeah, interesting stat. Utah State is 9-1 at home, but their defense is actually significantly worse, according to Torvik. And for that reason, I think I'm going to pick San Diego State. I just think if you allow the Aztecs to score, you can get crunched really quickly. And for that reason, I trust Brian Dutcher. Dane Sprinkles had a great first season, but the experience on the Aztecs is just too much to overcome.
No, that's fair. I still just believe generally in home court advantage in the Mountain West, even in more cases than other conferences. I think just the home court advantages, the big crowds and the smaller gyms and just the elevation and all that, like home court advantage might be the most prevalent in that conference. So there's a reason why the home teams keep winning these games. I don't think it's just random variance, but I'm picking Utah State for that reason. And mid-major game of the week coming up next. So we got Grand Canyon at Tarleton State. Ben, do you have anything insightful about this?
Like I said before, Grand Canyon would be my pick for the at-large team, or the non-Power 7 team, most likely to get an at-large bid. Sorry for the graphic, by the way. These colors do not mesh well with our gray background here. But I've seen Tarleton State in person, which they played Virginia early in the season, and they're very deep. They have like 20. It feels like they have like 20 guys on the roster. It was a strange deal. Not sure how many of them are still playing in the real rotation, but that was something interesting to see. But other than that, I mean, Grand Canyon has Bryce Drew. Grand Canyon has beaten San Diego State, which I just gave flowers before. I don't see any reason, even though they're on the road, to pick against the Lopes here.
I feel like I have to go with Grand Canyon in this game. I mean, like, they're kind of like that mid-major team that at this point everyone has to ride, with Samford and Indiana State losing last week. Like, they're the best hope of an at-large team out of a non-Power 6, out of a complete mid-major conference. So it's kind of like I want them to win. I think they're going to win. They do have the worst shade of purple, I will say that. So that's not going for them.
Yeah, I'm making Grand Canyon as well. Ben, I think you could correct me if I'm wrong, but Tarleton State was that team that they were a really good schedule for UVA because they play like 12 different defenses and like every single offensive set in the bag, and just like you have no idea what they're going to throw at you. And obviously they're not the most talented team, but it was an interesting watch to see. Like,
yeah, no, absolutely. You saw something different every time on the court, and they'd be another type of team to have like the 4-person line changes deal. Every 2 minutes. It's just if we're gonna play a low major team, that's the type I want to play.
All right, and then game 5, not 75. Wazoo at Arizona. This projected spread says it all. Albeit if it is 12, I'll probably pick Washington State against the spread, but I'm picking Arizona. They're starting to really cook. Although this is like a game that will potentially determine who wins the Pac-12 regular season.
Yeah, they just beat Arizona State by 45, and in the McHale Center, I don't see any reason to pick against the Wildcats. I think Washington State's a good team, right? Miles Rice is a great story. They have a couple other interesting transfers from all around the country, but man, they can turn the Wildcats can turn into a juggernaut. We've seen this happen a lot, so I have no reason to pick against Tommy Lloyd at this point.
Like, I hope I don't regret this pick, because the last time I watched Washington State was before this winning streak. Like, I've obviously kept up with the storyline, but I just haven't watched them playing in a game since then, and they didn't look great to me. But what I will say is, again, they're obviously a much different team than them, so I do need to watch them again. But with that being said, Arizona is just playing, like you said, they're just playing lights out right now. So I think Washington State is a tournament team. Their resume speaks for itself, but give me the Wildcats in this game.
And then these last two games will be very entertaining to talk about in different ways, obviously. But first off, game that could determine who wins the ACC regular season. UNC at Virginia. Personally, I'll take this one first again because I think UNC wins, and the reason why I say this is because the Hoos have a tendency to get absolutely massacred by teams that could just speed it up. And I'm not necessarily saying that this could necessarily happen here, but I think, like, if you look at the teams that have really handled UVA this year, UNC really fits that mold. So if they really can't control the tempo, could be a blowout. Game probably will be close to a pick 'em. UNC favored by a couple points probably, but I'm going Tar Heels outright for sure. Matt, what about you?
I'm going to go with Virginia in this game, and maybe it's because I obviously just saw North Carolina get beat at the Dome, and I'm kind of like basing it off of that. But like, it didn't feel like I was watching star power, honestly. And I've seen Armando Bacot twice now in person, and he's a great player, but it never feels like I'm watching like a true star dominate down low. And even with RJ Davis, I know he had a pretty cold game against Cuse, and that's not usually how he plays, but I just didn't really feel like I was watching the number 7 team in the country. And they still had a pretty good, like, overall, like, game. Like, it wasn't like Cuse shut them down to like 50 points. Like, they definitely were still putting in some buckets. They just ultimately didn't have enough to top what Cuse was able to score. And I feel like Virginia could shut them down. And I mean, I know you guys would know more than me, but it seems like UVA is playing their best defense of the season. I mean, they're keeping teams below 50 at this point. So I just don't see UNC scoring more than 65 on the high end. And I'm taking the Cavs to win this one at home.
I think I'm with Dan on this one. I'm going to take the Tar Heels. A couple of things worry me about this matchup in particular. One is Armando Bacot. He didn't have his best game against Syracuse, but he has come on in the last 5 games or so, averaging about 18 points, 17, 18 points. And we just don't have Virginia doesn't have the interior defenders necessarily to stop a force like Bacot, even though he's sort of regressed in his final season. Another thing that might be interesting to watch is I wonder who they're going to put defensively on Reese Beekman. He has been the main motor of this offense for a long time, or for basically the past 5 games of the season. We've been heavily relying on him to score at a high rate, more so than I think anyone is comfortable with, right? Beekman had 20 points. That accounted for around 40% of all of UVA's points. That's just not a sustainable thing to do, especially against a North Carolina team that's going to score more than Wake Forest. So for those reasons, I think I'm going to pick against Virginia and go with the Heels here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah, Ben and I are on the same page. Obviously, we both hope we're wrong. But finally, Alabama at Kentucky. This is just going to be a lot of points. I already alluded to it. He's over under 185 projected. I don't know. Matt, do you want to go first here, Ben? I mean,
yeah. I mean, like, I don't really know what to think. Like, Kentucky just seems like one of the most sporadic teams in college basketball. Like, they win games they should and shouldn't win. They lose games they should and shouldn't lose. Like, they've done like the bingo of college basketball this season. And that's kind of what their team makeup is. I mean, they've got a lot of freshmen, but they do have a star in Antonio Reeves, and they've got a transfer, and like they've got a good overall team. Alabama leads the SEC when it comes down to it, though, and Kentucky has not been dominant at home. Like, they've definitely looked shaky. It's not like Rupp Arena is like Allen Fieldhouse for Kansas this year. I mean, like, Florida played well at Kentucky, and I don't know. I really don't know. Like, the line being a pick is really true in this because I don't know, and I guess I'll just go with Alabama. Just, I don't know. Give me Alabama. It's such a toss-up.
So this game might hit 200 total points, and I will be very excited to watch it. It's just gonna be a fantastic game. Some people say, "Oh, I love defense." I don't care. I want to watch Dillingham go off for 30 and Mark Sears go for a 30 and 15 assist type game. It'll be a fun game to watch. That being said, Alabama sneakily still hasn't beaten much of anyone. It's so weird to say that they're 10-2 in the league. They lead the league by multiple games, maybe just one game. They beat Auburn, right? But they got smoked by Tennessee, right? They lost to Auburn. Then again, they crushed South Carolina, but LSU beat South Carolina, right? They still haven't beat Kentucky or Tennessee. And until that changes, I'm not going to pick against Kentucky or Tennessee, even though Kentucky has been, a little bit stagnant, a little bit troublesome the past few weeks. That Auburn game showed a lot to me, especially since the Tigers are so powerful at home, and Kentucky was able to go in and control that game and not even have their best offensive outing and still come away with an 11-point win. Give me the Wildcats at home.
I hear you. The point you brought up. I don't think Kentucky is the team. Like, you say, oh, Alabama hasn't beaten anybody. Like, I don't think Kentucky is one of the teams to beat in this country. So I'm going Alabama. A lot of scoring. I guess Alabama makes more stops. That's not really the way I want to analyze it, but I don't know. Alabama has a better offense of those two juggernauts offensively. That will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Thanks again for watching and listening. Be sure to follow us on the socials at CBB Review. We're on Instagram, Twitter, a little bit on Facebook as well. So be sure to follow us. Subscribe if you are watching us on YouTube. Appreciate the support once again. Thanks for watching and take care.